Susan Aglukark is a renowned Inuk Canadian singer-songwriter and Juno Award winner, known for blending Inuit folk with pop to explore Northern, Indigenous, and deeply personal themes. She is best known for her 1995 hit O Siem, becoming the first Inuk performer to reach the top 10 in Canada. She was named an Officer of the Order of Canada for her powerful songs that relate the stories of Canada's Inuit and for her advocacy for Northern communities. She received the Governor General's Performing Arts Award for Lifetime Artistic Achievement in 2016 and the Allan Waters Humanitarian Award at the 2022 Juno Awards. Most recently, she released Kihiani, a memoir of healing and self-discovery. Now let's get into today's episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Cycle Breakers podcast. Today I am so excited and honored to welcome today's guest. I grew up listening to her music. I have such clear, fond, visceral memories of the first time I heard her hit song, O Siem. And so it is my great pleasure to welcome Susan Aglukark to the Cycle Breakers podcast. And so I'd like you to begin by introducing yourself in your own way, although I know many of our listeners, depending on their age and demographic, will be familiar with you and your work, your music. So yeah, please introduce yourself in your own way.
All right, thank you so much, Rachel. Inugama sibulakpami inukdut okang nektunga Susan ngoyunga Susan Aglukark Akvermingang nekuplunga kivalang may mana Ontario miutaulaklunga inyaktiuyunga titaraktiyunga sanangwaktiyunga. I am Inuk, originally from Akvet in the Kivalliq region of the Nunavut territory. I am now residing in Ottawa, Ontario. I'm a singer-songwriter, also an author and a mixed media artist, so multi artist. And founder of a charity called the Arctic Rose Foundation. And through there, I share the lessons I've learned over the course of these 35 years that have helped me to stay on my path. Generally a healing path, but also a discovery path. And the charity works with and utilizes arts as a tool for basic mental health support. But also just simply to reawaken dreamers in all of us.
Ooh, I got chills as you said that last line, to awaken the dreamers or reawaken the dreamers in all of us. And we're going to come back to that because I think that is so, so beautiful. And after reading your memoir, it was so interesting to me to learn about the intricacies of your journey and how it wasn't actually something you had initially set out to do, and that it kind of, I don't want to say it fell into your lap, but I mean, it was divinely aligned for you. And, but how throughout the journey, there was this dreamer quality that kept propelling you into these different avenues and expressions, and we're going to get into that because I think that is something that will be really relevant and the medicine that a lot of folks need to hear. But starting with the music, which is, what most people will initially have known you for, and you've had such an incredible music career, and so many incredible awards and achievements. And what I found so interesting is in the memoir that it wasn't something you were necessarily pursuing and that it did unfold for you. Can you take us back to that? Because, growing up, and I believe it was Rankin Inlet that you grew up, and, coming from a small community, and I imagine that, dreaming was a big part of your childhood, and coming from a very small town myself, I can identify with that. But yeah, can you walk us through a little bit of those early years of your journey and the initial unfolding of the career, which it's so fascinating to hear from your perspective of like, you didn't even know what was happening and it was happening. So yeah, could you touch on that a bit?
Sure. So actually, my hometown is Akvet. Rankin Inlet is one of the communities on the west coast of the Hudson Bay, which forms what we call the Kihiani region. Um, and so Rankin is where my father was from. Traditionally, he was from another community called Chesterfield, but they moved to Rankin to work for the nickel mine when he was very young. My mother is from Akbayat, and we settled back in Akbayat in 1978. So most of us siblings consider Akbayat to be our hometown. But we're from the Kihiani region, the west coast of the Hudson Bay. I was born to and grew up in a really unique time in Inuit history, which is one of those realizations that were one of those puzzle pieces that helped me trace our trauma. Our generation of Inuit are the first to be born and to live all of our life in settlement. And when we trace the history of trauma, this becomes very important in the early part of my journey. And the early part of my journey that I refer to is that from when I moved to Ottawa and left to leave, not the career that unfolded, but the leaving. I had to leave this community that I loved in 1989 because there's a before and an after in the book. The before was incredible. You know, when you're born to settlement, you don't refer to settlement as that place that was not ours because we've only known settlement. And so my childhood, until this assault, was a beautiful childhood. I have fond memories in the communities that we lived in. And I understand and appreciate now how important that childhood was, because fast forward to when we moved to Akbayat in 1978, my father was a minister, an ordained minister, and we had this church in Akbayat, where they were ministers, or the ministers of this church. And I recall they were also musicians. They were really wonderful musicians and singers, my mom and my dad. And I recall this sermon my dad preached. I was 14, maybe 15 years old. And in his sermon, he talked about King David as being the ultimate dreamer. And this touched me so deeply because I always knew I was a little bit different. I always had been. Was it by design? Was it because of the assault? Was it the trauma that made me a little bit different? Or was I just that way? I choose to believe now that I was just that way, and that maybe the trauma added to it, because I could totally relate to King David as a dreamer. I was always off somewhere else. I had other things that compelled me in the community, by community living. Ways of living in a community, which is very different from living in a city, for example. I'd never been in a city yet. If I were to dream or wish for something, it wouldn't be the same as what I wish for now. It would just be, I love walking along the ocean. I love walking out on the land. I love the way that all of this touches me so deeply. So in this way, there is this child out in the middle of the tundra that is in love with life in the tundra. That love just survived the trauma. So the before and the after is very important in the book that people read, because what followed after, when I moved to Ottawa in 1989, was these series of opportunities. And they were opportunities that became kind of this disruptor, if you will, of the trauma. I didn't understand. I couldn't comprehend, let alone understand, that what was happening in the recording studio with these musicians was that I was finding my people, which is the artists. And there I'm discovering that safety is critical to a healing journey, that you could heal, that you could get well, that there's all these possibilities. I didn't know that then, but that's what was starting to happen shortly after moving to Ottawa. So there's these series of events that occur at the same time. I leave to leave, starting over. Best thing I could have done for myself, probably saved my life. I get a wonderful boss, David Webster, in that first year of working for Indian Affairs. Series of events, the searching video, the CBC recording project that is now the Dreams for You cassette tape. The song Dreams for You comes from my dad's sermon. The searching video comes from a poem I wrote in high school, in studio, working on that first album, Arctic Rose. So all of this is happening in that first year that I moved to Ottawa. This is where I'm starting to understand what's shifting in mind and body, and that this shifting, I later understand, some years later, were the early stages of healing. And so that becomes part of the after story. I had to deal with a court case. I had to be a part of that. I didn't initiate it. Others did, and I was invited to join. But the move to Ottawa after the court case and all of the things that followed shortly after become kind of the stepping stones, if you will, towards what has since been a 35-year healing journey.
Wow. Oh, there's so many things in what you shared, and having read the book, and you know, before I go further, anyone listening, if you have not read this beautiful memoir, Kihiani, am I pronouncing that correctly?
You got it, yeah.
Okay. It is so moving and is so intimate. Like, you really feel as the reader, like you're in your mind and in your heart. Like, I felt like I was deeply grieving when you were grieving. I felt like I was, you know, processing when you were processing. Like, you have this really beautiful way of writing and articulating. And again, I'm going to get into that in a moment because of, you know, your writing process. But it is so moving, and you know, a lot of what you're sharing, we or she goes into greater detail in the book. So highly recommend getting your hands on that book, because it's so empowering and inspiring. What I'm picking up, and I wonder if you've had this made this similar connection, is, you know, when you were a young girl, being that dreamer, feeling a little different, but being that dreamer, do you now understand that that was planting the seeds in ways for what came to fruition in your life and career, even though maybe in the moment you were not piecing that together, but in hindsight, have you had that? And then I guess going back into like the importance of dreaming, of allowing ourselves to dream.
I do believe that. Um, I I also believe that we are um, parts of the environment we've grown up in. And so, what I mean by that is, I grew up with these incredible parents who were what we call in Inuktitut Nunamutat, which translates to they were from the land. And what that means is their generation, birth and formative years, was traditional. And then in their early adult years, their life transformed into, pardon me, the settlement life. So they can claim being Nunnamutat from the land. I could not, because I was born to settlement. I'm still born in an Inuit community, and to an Inuit community, an Inuit family. So I'm still an Inuk, as much as they are, but not on the land, not in the traditional way. So there's that other piece. As this generation of Inuit, we can say we were born to the last generation who were traditional. And then these parents become ordained ministers and become counselors and become leaders in their community. And to witness this and to be a part of this becomes part of who I am as a dreamer, as somebody who, like my parents, was always compelled. We all are, all of our siblings are compelled to build and believe in our best lives possible. They all have lived and are living their best life because our parents did. And so that's becomes a part of what forms me as this person living an incredible life, my best life I never imagined these last 35 years. But also, when I think of all the things that have occurred and continue to occur, there is no doubt now in my very being that this was always me. So um, is that an inevitability? I believe that too. Um, but at the end of the day, I'm also um, a realist, and that is to say, some days are very hard. We live in incredible times, and we have this gift of a beautiful life that we continue to work for and build. But the reality is, we also come from complex trauma, and so did we ask for that? No. And so finding that balance of dream life and the real world, and being somewhere in the path, in these two paths, and living this life, um, is what I have the privilege of doing these in this time.
Thank you for that perspective. I think that's so beautifully articulated, and I do resonate and do agree to your perspective in ways of, yes, there was a planting of the seeds, but were those seeds planted because of the inevitability of what unfolded, or was it just a young girl dreaming a dream? uh, I think both can coexist. I think both are true. It's not a yeah, it's this end, and I like that perspective. And I also think there is, you talk a lot about these complex traumas, and I myself, in my mid 30s became aware of these deep complex traumas, and all of it intergenerational, and a lot of it connected to my maternal lineage, which is, my Anishinaabe Indigenous side. And so in my mid 30s, reconciling, or yes, reconciling, but also understanding the complexities of that. And yeah, it's very nuanced, but anyway, I resonate a lot with what you're sharing. So something else I found really interesting, really fascinating about your story is that you describe, and you've kind of alluded to this, saying, like, I always felt a little different, but you describe feeling alone, lonely, and not belonging as a significant theme in your early life. And how did that shape the way that you saw yourself, especially as you began to step into such a visible, very public facing career, which again, unfolded over time? But how did you begin to navigate that?
Um, I guess there's a point at the halfway point of the career, so, and around the 2000s, when um, there's a real moment of uh, checking in with self. Can you keep doing this? Um, Mostly because, as Indigenous artists, many of us, whether we realize it or not, and this is the point that I realized it, we were triggered. It's never just a concert. It's never just entertaining. A lot of our art, songs for songwriters and other respective artists for their art, comes from some real dark places. And so that's going to inevitably show up on stage. And so there's a point where I was exhausted, and I wanted just simply to be. And so I guess it was from that point on when I had to ask the question, can you keep doing this? And I knew that I wanted to. And the journey shifted from um, coasting. I was primarily coasting up to that point. I understood enough up to that point, that things needed to be that they were for me to get to that point. But at some point, you ask yourself, how much more can you do? Who do you want to be? Do you want to do this? I want to be my best self. I want to keep doing this. And there's enough of me at that point that knew, actually, I love singing. I love writing. I love creating. I want to do this. And delving deeper to the cause of the doubt, not so that the anger drove it, but so that inspiration took over, so that um, I could retrain myself to be present as an artist for the sake of the art, for the sake of the process of creating, of discovering self through this process of creating. And that's been the primary force that has guided me for the other half of the career. And this is, again, the privilege of being in this world, in this time, as an Indigenous artist. You know, I wake up every morning, and as tiring as things can get, I get to do this. I get to live this life. I get to draw from those kinds of moments. I got to discover that. And it becomes very important in the work we do now with the Art to Growth Foundation.
I have a couple questions that are coming to mind, and I think it kind of segues into what I wanted to ask next. But you mentioned this coasting, and do you feel you describe it as coasting for the first half of the career because you were kind of thrust into it, like it wasn't something we hear from other artists and their journeys of like they were setting out for wherever to build a career, and in your case it wasn't what you were setting out to do. You were leaving to leave to build a career, not necessarily as a singer-songwriter, but that unfolded. And so this coasting that you describe, do you think that has part to do with it? And then because there is this complex trauma that you're living with and still grappling with and processing, that shaped kind of the first half of the career? Because I know in the book you mentioned and identified, maybe in hindsight, I don't know if it was in the moment, that you would freeze or that your breath would start to pick up and feel quite overwhelming, and that it was a freeze response, a trauma response. I guess my question is that how you would describe kind of the first half, is like still really living with that trauma quite actively, and then the second half was as it began to process and heal and become more conscious and intentional?
Yeah, that's a really great way to describe it, Rachel. And that is exactly what was happening. Was that the first half was all about, because I went into it with no knowledge or awareness or tools to manage what I was becoming aware of or discovering as trauma and discovering as possibly healing trauma, because none of that was there for me. I was discovering it as I was living it. And often that would happen during a tour, during a concert, during an interview. And so, yeah, that was the first half of the career. And then there was a partway through point where, and I mentioned it earlier, where you start to, and I don't know, this is kind of a standard healing journey process. There are steps that occur. But I'm at partway through that part, I'm starting to feel different. Maybe not lighter, but definitely not darker. There was always this little cloud or darkness that seemed to follow me everywhere, and I didn't know what it was, and I thought it was normal. I thought that was going to be my life, but this starts to lift, and I start to understand something's changed. I want to know what that is, and that becomes the next stage, which is the other half of the healing journey, and that choice that I made, which was to actively participate in the healing. What is this? What is the fear that has compelled me the first half? The word we use for that, and that informs the writing of our programs with the Arctic Rose Foundation, is ilra, which is the root word for to ilrasuk, or to be in a state of emotional fear. And so discovering that stuff becomes part of the healing steps, and that becomes the second half of my life up to now. So definitely there was that first half and that second half, much like there was the before and the after. And again, I don't know if privilege is the right word, but that I get to be a part of that journey. That's an incredible gift that I'm very grateful for.
That's really beautiful, and thank you for sharing. And something that in the work I do with, a lot of it is with Indigenous women, we carry a deep visibility wound. And so I think about your career not really having a moment to register what's happening because it happened so quickly and seemingly by happenstance, but again, it was inevitable. And that visibility wound for you, whatever that was. And I think a lot of us Indigenous women carry that because of our lineage, and because for many generations it wasn't safe to be seen and to be expressed. And I think also then the nature of your career, being an advocate and a voice for Northerners, and especially the Inuit community. And so do you feel that, thinking of that first half, part of that trauma response was also collective, not just yours, but also like what you were caring for your peoples and your communities?
I do see it now. I think, especially, I would say the first 10 years of the career. Um, when I wrote Arctic Rose, um, I really, I really didn't think beyond Arctic Rose. And so what I did there was I put everything I had brought with me to Ottawa in 1989 into the Arctic Rose Project. What I wasn't prepared for was to discover I wasn't alone, that there were so many uh, who had the same story. And frankly, 100% of the Indigenous community has trauma. I see that now. But in the beginning, in the first 5 or 6 years, I felt this responsibility to never abandon what I had started with Arctic Rose. I didn't know how to move forward with them, but I, I I I felt very strongly that, and I still do. I could not abandon them, and that weighed heavy for a long time. So when we talk about compounded trauma, the compounded trauma before this was um, my mom's trauma, my dad's trauma, the trauma of the community, the different traumas in the community. And then we add this to that. And so, but also, um, again, to be a part of discovering it for what it is, connecting the dots, coming to learn what that is, actually puts puzzle pieces into place, actually forms a clearer picture of what it is, which becomes a part of the healing. Understanding and becoming aware of these pieces is part of healing. And so there was that for the first 5, 10 years. And then there was the choice. Now what? What's next? And then forge ahead. So there was a period of time where that was a responsibility, a duty I felt I had because I started it with Arctic Rose. But then moving forward, with whatever next step reveals itself, and taking those steps with those who had come on board with Arctic Rose.
I really love how you keep framing it as like there was this point where you made a choice, because it's not as simplified as that, but in a sense it is, because I can relate to that, where you do have a choice. You can choose to stay in the pain, the trauma, the victimhood, or we can choose to, as you keep saying, live and lead our best lives, whatever that is uniquely for us. And it's something I really emphasize in the work I do with clients, is like we do have choice. Like that is something that cannot be taken away from us, that we now do have the privilege to have choice, where it wasn't always that way, especially for our ancestors. Something I mentioned before we press record is how a lot of your journal entries reminded me of my own, especially in periods and seasons for me where I was really in my own pain and suffering, and I can read these entries and just be like, oh, like she was going through it and she didn't see a way out. And so I felt the tenderness of what you were sharing, and it was so real and so raw. And you can tell you were processing so much in real time. And I think it's so beautiful that you still have those journals to, as like a time capsule to go back to. Because a large part of your career is also songwriting, how has writing in general become a tool, or been a tool for your healing? Because, yeah, I relate to that quite a bit.
Um, I've been writing since I was very, very young. I don't recall who gave me my first diary. I remember that it was a Holly Hobby diary. Um, and I would have been maybe 12 or 13 or 14 years old when I got this first diary, and I know that I'd been writing in it from the very beginning. And I don't know what I would have written at that age. um, but when it became a what I now understand is trauma-driven writing was um, when I wrote Searching, Kainakpunga in Inuktitut in high school in Yellowknife, because that was when I started to really grapple with um, the assault. I had up to that point been able to store it away. Um, but there was something about being in residence and being away from home, and I think largely it was the overwhelming feeling of not belonging. I was a stranger in this new part of the territory because it was in the west. We were from the east, um, and so writing became my safe place. I would write in the journal that I had there, and then later in Ottawa, I did very little writing after graduating from high school. And when I moved to Ottawa a year or two later after graduating from high school, there was about a 5 year period between writing Searching and then moving to Ottawa, 5 or 6 years. And the opportunity to write with actual songwriters presented itself, and that was after the CBC recording. And the CBC recording was a series of little Inuktitut poems. When CBC called me, CBC Northern Services called me at my day job, Indian Affairs day job, asking me for some more songs because everyone had just seen the Searching project, video project. I initially said I have writings, but they're not songs. They're just short little Inuktitut writings. And those become songs, which becomes the introduction to a producer with whom I worked on the Arctic Rose project with. All of it writing, all of it becoming songwriting. It was the first time that I'm in the studio working as a songwriter, but always I remember the conversations being, I'm not a songwriter, I'm not a singer, I don't know how to do this. And actually, that was a conversation with that producer that I had. I'm not a songwriter. I'm not an artist. I'm not a singer, but I know grief. I know loss. I know trauma. So if we're going to do this, that's what I will write about. So writing has been that very important outlet for me from the very beginning, from 13, 14 on, and especially from high school on, when when the trauma resurfaced, and has stayed since. That is what the writing um, was helping me navigate since I was about 15 or 16 years old.
Yeah, wow, so beautiful and cathartic, right? I mean, it was for you, but then how beautiful is it that that has then shaped so much of your career, that you got to share and transmute a lot of that pain into power. And one thing before we kind of get into to the power and reclaiming narrative, because humility is so ingrained in our communities as an Indigenous people, and you rising to fame and celebrity status, which you share that you were in disbelief for a while and found it hard to, I guess, grapple with or maybe accept. But when did that shift for you? And what does that, look like? Because you are, I sense, and I read the book, you are very humble. You haven't allowed your career success to turn you into a boastful or egotistical person. I can just tell. And I don't even think for Indigenous folks, it's quite uncommon to see that. But how have you remained humble? And at one point, did that internal shift happen where you could, kind of see yourself as, okay, I am maybe a little bit of a celebrity. I am actually maybe a little famous because you are.
Um, yeah, and that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it because we do these workshops for artists and songwriters, and often um, many young up and coming wannabe superstars, and great if that's your goal. I mean, I wish you all the success because we need you. Um, I think there was a point in my career where, after some of the awards and after all of the other things, the recognitions, I had to step into the other part of a duty and a responsibility, which is this is you, um, and I became compelled by and motivated by to carry on um, by stepping into confidence, not arrogance. I think there's a very clear line between the two. Um, I I could do that because I still, and I come back to this with every interview. I'm just so grateful that we're living this incredible life. You know, if I could paint a picture of where I came from, and I loved it. I love that life. Don't get me wrong. I will forever harbor a little bit of anger in my heart for having to leave home because I had a plan. I have four beautiful sisters. We were going to have families together. We were going to go hunting and fishing and camping together. We had a plan. It was a beautiful plan. And then things changed and I had to reset and start over. So I'll forever keep a part of my anger towards having to be the one to leave. But the rest of it is 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 realizing what you get to do. And there's no room for arrogance in that part. There's no room for I get to do this. I just I'm just I just love what we're building, what we've built. So there was a time partway through when the choice to step into confidently stepping into this life every day. It is a life of intention. It doesn't just happen. Um, and choosing every day to fight for this life, to keep building this life, is, I think, what keeps us humble. It's hard work. Every day, my husband and I wake up, and what's on the schedule today? We have a schedule, we have a routine, we treat it like a day job, Monday to Friday. We go out and work and gig on the weekends and whenever the work comes to us. It's a life of intention. But again, I would never have discovered intention as part of a healing tool had it not been for this life. So it's this beautiful cycle that has taken over. Um, and all of it has to come from humility. Because it's a series of happenstances that brought me to this place. And I'm grateful for that and those happenstances and the people that brought them to me.
I love that. Confidence over arrogance. That is such a huge distinction, and thank you for that. That really, I'm like playing that on loop. I think that's a beautiful piece of wisdom in medicine, and you can still want your work to reach, large amounts of people and have impact, but yeah, distinguishing, having confidence, and persistence to keep going, but to not, let that arrogance, which can get the best of us at times. And so thank you for that beautiful perspective. And I have to bring it up because this song shaped me. It really did. I remember the first time I heard O Siem. I remember, I'm a small town girl, and music was always playing in the household, and I remember, and when I heard O Siem, I wanted to play that song on repeat. But it's not like today where until you have the CD or the cassette, and you can do that. If it's on the radio, you have to wait until it plays again. But I remember my mom playing it, and her friends playing it, and just being moved by the song. And even, after reading the book, I don't know how many times I played it, but I've played it a lot of times. And it just takes me back to, a kid in the 90s. And so, that is one of your biggest hit songs that people will know you and recognize your work from. How has that song shaped you and your career, all these years, decades later?
Um, I have I have to say it this way. If there was a song that could possibly be the best song to have launched my life into what it has become, it was that song. I couldn't have picked a better song if I tried. Everything about that song from when it was inspired, and um, there's a lot of misinformation about O Siem, and so um, I like to clear up where it came from. So O Siem is First Nations, not Inuit. I'm an Inuk. And so when I first heard it in 1993, the language, the Coast Salish language that it comes from, and the two gentlemen who first introduced me to Haichka, Siamosiea, and the ceremony behind it, I was so touched by it. This is the early writing of this child. So we had just signed the record deal. I was with a major label, and I was it was all way over my head. So I was constantly overwhelmed and in a bit of a panic state. And at a speaking engagement, one of my very early ones, there was myself at the head table, and there's other guests, and then there's these two gentlemen from a Coast Salish nation out from British Columbia, and they were the first speakers. And what they did, by honoring the audience, set the tone for the early part of my career, by saying Haichka Siamosiea. And what the gesture and words do is it welcomes and honors guests. It welcomes and honors everybody in the room. And so for me, at that time, this young uh, first ever worldwide record deal signer, um, it was very clear to me then, this is a larger opportunity than individual and self. And it was a relief because I thought I had to be the celebrity. But they reminded me that there's this other opportunity that is rolling out right now, and just keep your heart and your mind open, and you'll walk the path. Um, and O Siem did that. And every time I sing it, it reminds me what you remember, what happened in the early discovery of this song. Don't forget that. And that's what's guided me these 35 years. And O Siem is that song that did that.
Wow. Oh, I could like be moved to tears just hearing that. And I did know because you explained it in the book, which again I didn't know until I had read the book. But when I understood the meaning behind the song, and you've got a lot of your lyrics written out in the memoir, and again like reading them, and honestly with every time the lyrics would show up, I would put the song on so I could like read it a long time, kind of sing along with the different songs. But that one in particular, when I read the meaning, and then remembering the visceral reaction I still get to this day listening to that song, and being transported back to, I mean, I would have been 8 or 9 years old, and just remembering how that song moved me, because there's this like ancestral connection. And honestly, I don't even know that I was aware that you were an Inuk woman. I definitely wouldn't have in the 90s. And so I think also, as a young girl, I was disconnected from my culture. So I think there was something also in those words that were medicine for me, that my spirit knew and remembered. Like that's what I really felt, the message I was receiving reading the memoir, and understanding the meaning behind the book, or sorry, the song. So anyway, I want to share that, but thank you for sharing, and yeah, also clearing up any misinformation that other folks might have about that song. Now let's move into the final part of our conversation, the work you're doing now. You talk about towards the end of the book rediscovering joy, and not just through singing and songwriting, but creating, whether it's painting, expression without pressure. And I think you touched on that. That's what you're bringing into the Arctic Rose Foundation, and that work, and these workshops with, aspiring artists. So yeah, what has that return to joy been like for you? And yeah, coming home to yourself again, coming back to yourself.
Again, I'm going to wrap it up in this theme of privilege. I feel so privileged to come to that point in my life. I remember very clearly when it happened, and I had done as much work as I could do with the writing and the songwriting, and I'm brought up by a traditional seamstress, so our mother taught all of us how to sew, how to bead, how to create, so we could do the traditional things. And so I utilized those as well as part of, the creative arts as an expressive tool. But there was more I needed to do. There was more I needed to get to. And so I remember signing up for this painting course in 2011 or 2012, and I'm listening to Sean Colvin, waiting for this course to start, standing outside. It was a beautiful day, and a song is playing called "This Must Be the Place," and there's a moment in the song where there was like a really deep exhale in my body, and my body remembered before the assault, and that became the goal. If the body can heal enough, if the mind and soul and spirit can heal enough so that you remember, and you can shift your memory enough that that becomes the guiding force, not the trauma, but this memory. What a privilege. And it happened. It happened for me. That was one of two times that happened for me. And so from that point on, the goal of creating became that little spark, that remembering. And it's been that since then. And the more I did that work, the more I understood I have to share this. I have to share through my process the possibility that is we can heal enough. We're never going to be 100% whole. There's always going to be triggers. There's always going to be memories. But we can also come back to enough of that really nice memory, of that real joyful memory, or memory of joy, that becomes the guiding force and not the trauma. And so that became the Arctic Rose Foundation. Expressive arts is that tool now. And we work with healthy emotion, or reconnecting and sitting with emotion. All of it is the first step in the work we do through expressive arts, because that's what healed me enough to get here and to stay here.
Wow. So let's talk about the Arctic Rose Foundation just a little bit more, and how can people learn more or get involved, or bring you into community, or bring to the organization, or whatever initiative they're working on. We can share that good work that you're doing now.
So there's information available through the arcticrose.org website. We also have an Instagram, Arctic Rose Foundation, and a Facebook page, and we keep updating that with work that we do. I have visited 3 sites this year so far, so you will see some updates from the visits to our partner sites. And it's an ongoing development. There's 2 programs. Messy Book is the after-school program that runs in the partner sites, hire and train local youth, high school students to run the program. We send Indigenous artists are deployed to one of the partner sites every month to share their art and their story. So it's utilizing our collective healing journeys and the ways that we express the things we're discovering as the tool to support basic mental health through the Arctic Rose Foundation.
No, but thank you for that, and we'll link all of that in the show notes. I want to close on this. It's how I close on every single podcast. Is what does it mean to you to be a cycle breaker?
I am very honored to be called a cycle breaker. Thank you for that. It's another one of the privileges, but also to be brutally honest about the processes. Each of us has our respective process in our healing journeys, and we draw from them every day. The goal being the well enough you to stay on the path that you're on, so that there's less work for the next generation. That is as simple as I can get with my process on my journey, sharing as much as I can in the best way that I can. And the goal being, if cycle breaking is, we do the work we need to do in this generation so that the next generation has a better chance at their dream life, then that's the privileged life I am living right now.
That is so beautiful, and thank you. We say chi miigwech for your time, your energy, your wisdom, and I think the work you're doing still today is incredible and so impactful. So thank you for being a part of the podcast and being with us here today.
Thank you, Rachael.